Hello. I'm going to attempt to explain music theory uh, as fast as possible, hopefully in a way that can be understood by a player of any level or experience. Some of the terminologies I'll be using are exclusive to playing guitar, things like fret and string. Uh, and then all of the other information could be applicable to any other instrument. So, on the off chance that you're a piano player or a trumpet player that doesn't know music theory, plowing through a few words, you can still learn music theory from this. Uh, now, the prerequisites to having this conversation is knowing a few terminologies. For starters, your notes and what they are, and where they are on your fretboard. Now, the notes available to you are A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And every time you wrap back around, you're in a new octave, but using the same notes. So there's no H. It'd be fun if there was. But anyway, so, and knowing where they are, here's your A. Here's another A. There's another A. So from there you can expound. The next thing you'll need to know is your whole step and half step terminology. Half step on a guitar means just one fret. So if I say go a half step up, if you're on the 5th fret, that means go to the 6th fret. If you're on the 5th fret and I say go down a half a step, then you go from the 5th fret to the 4th fret. Now the next terminology is whole step, and that is when you go 2 frets. So if I'm on the 5th fret, then you would go up a whole step to the 7th fret, 5, 7, or down a whole step, 5 to 3. So that's half step, whole step, half step, whole step. The next thing you need to know is the terminologies sharp and flat. And put simply, for guitar, sharp means go up 1 fret, and flat means go down 1 fret. So it's very similar to saying half step. It's not exactly the same thing because the terminology half step and whole step take on a different meaning when you're actually in a key. So for instance, if I'm in the key of C and I say go up a whole step and I'm at B, well, a whole step in that instance is literally only 1 fret. Confusing, I know. Why'd they make it that way? I don't know. But that's just a fact of life that you have to get used to when you know music theory, is there are a couple of things that, you know, a couple terminologies that can mean different things in different uses, and that can get a little confusing until you get used to it. So now that you know you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you go up an octave, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you're up an octave. Now let me show you how to construct a major scale. And this we're going to do without using any note names, because the concept is how many whole steps and half steps you move. And the best way I've found to put this to make it simpler, because when you say it out loud, it sounds bizarre and you know, it's not very ergonomically put. So you have 2 whole steps and a half step, 3 whole steps and a half step. That makes your scale, and the whole steps refer to the gaps between notes. So here's my establishing note, then I go up a whole step, up a whole step, up a half step, so that's my 2 wholes and a half, then up a whole step, up a whole step, up a whole step, up a half. There's my 3 wholes and a half. So whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And I did that all on 1 string so that you could see how that works. Now I'll go ahead and in the key of C, so that we don't have to use any sharps and flats in our terminology, I'll show you how to play the standard guitar box major scale. And that looks like this. that's up through the first octave. Now you've actually played a C major scale, but keeping with the guitar box that goes from E string to E string, I'll complete it now. Now I will show you really quick. This is slightly advanced, but not really. This is a scale that I developed independent of anything else, meaning that I didn't make up this scale. I'm literally just playing a G scale or a C scale, major scale. And, but this was something that for the sake of shredding, going fast, like when you get later on, you'll find that having 3 notes on a string can be advantageous to going fast, because you can do triple hammer on, or triple pull off, triple hammer on. And you can see how that little trick, which isn't very hard, can develop speed. Well, the problem comes with when you're doing that and you have a couple spots where there's only 2 notes and you only go so fast through them. So this is a major scale for a guitar, which has 3 notes per string all the way up. And the other advantage to this scale is it breaks you out of the box. So a lot of guitarists will learn their box scales, their major, their minor, their pentatonic, and then they're stuck in a box. Like they play comfortably in that box, but outside of that box, the fretboard can still feel a little mysterious or uncomfortable. This will take you from this portion of your neck up to this portion. Boom. So here it is. The only real flaw in this one being that while it does work you all the way up here, unlike your box scale, it doesn't tie you off neatly at your home base or your first degree of your scale, meaning that we're not starting on C and ending on C. We're starting on C and ending on F. But if you're doing it in the process of playing a solo, that doesn't have to be where it ends, nor do I think you should solo by going from one note to the next note of the scale. Don't get me wrong, when you're learning your scales and you're learning to improvise, that's the easiest thing to do. You know, you can think of it as like when Indiana Jones has to cross the floor. Parts of it will fall out from underneath him if he steps on them, and other spots are solid. And when you learn your scale, you see the scale as those solid spots. But when you're new to the dungeon, you're going to step just from the next one to the next one, nice and slowly. When you live in the dungeon, you're doing cartwheels, you're running across it, you're hitting spots you're not supposed to hit, but it's not falling out, you know. So that's my metaphor. I hope it holds up. So now you know how to make your major scale. And now I'm going to show you, and this is very important, how it relates to your minor scale, because your major scale and your minor scale are the same thing, started at different times, and I'll throw an advanced word at you. They're just different modes of the same scale. And all a mode is when you take a scale and you started at one note and ended at another note. Now, when you do that in key, that's what we think of as ordinary. But if you start from any degree but your 1, it has a whole new flavor and tone to it. It can be hard to hear because a lot of people will learn their modes while practicing their major scale, and without anything juxtaposed to it, it all just kind of feels like the major scale, and you're like, how is this any different? But it's when you really, you know, juxtapose it to, say, a pedal tone, which a pedal tone is when you have just one thing that's always going, no matter what you do. So like, in this, my A is my pentatonic scale, or my pedal tone. Why did I say that? Hey, it wouldn't be a good instructional video without the instructor making mistakes, right? So in that case, A was the pedal tone. It's the thing that just keeps going. And that can be a good way for exploring modes and figuring out what atmosphere they create, which is the best way I can put it, is that each mode has its own atmosphere. As a matter of fact, when the Gregorian monks developed what essentially is the closest we have to our modern music staff and way of looking at things. They initially only worked in C, and by the way, at their time, because the tuning of instruments has gone up, so at that time C would have been, I don't know, B flat or A or something, but it was their C. But everything was in the key of C, and the way they made a song sound different than the last song they sang was just singing in a different mode. So anyway, now the way that the major scale relates to the minor scale, you can think of it on guitar as just going back 3 half steps. And that is going to be your relative minor. So if I go from C down to A, and then I just play all my notes, no sharps, no flats, I get my minor scale. That's through the first octave and then completing the box. Now, of course, you can do the 3 note at a time thing. I'll show you that. And that gives you 3 notes per string so that you can go from this part of your neck to this part of your neck. And when you want to do triple hammer-ons, triple pull-offs, or just go fast up your neck, you have a scale that's ergonomically designed for doing so. Now, the other thing is, so you have your major scale and your minor scale, and they use the same notes as each other. The next thing that you should probably know is the pentatonic scale, and it's most likely, of all of the things I've said, aside from where your notes are and what sharp and flat mean, out of most of the guitarists I'm talking to, this is something you probably definitely know already. And that is just... And you'll notice I did it in the A position. The reason being is that the pentatonic scale is actually a minor scale. With 2 of the degrees taken out. I should say that the pentatonic scale from a guitarist standpoint is a minor scale, because obviously other instruments do learn the major pentatonic. For some reason, guitar just tends to be approached from more of a minor standpoint, even though you have genres like country and bluegrass that do function mostly in major keys. Bulk of guitarists kind of just launch off from minor, kind of because of the pentatonic scale, I think, because that tends to be the first, if not only, scale most guitarists will learn, even if they're self-taught. And the reason for the pentatonic scale being the way it is if you think of a scale as guiding you through, these are the notes that will work. Well, there's 2 notes in your major and minor scale that can still rub against a chord and not sound good, even though it's technically correct. That's those 2. And you can hear in isolation, you know, you can see how, yeah, you could be playing a song and hit one of these correct notes and have it like not really feel like it was done on purpose, not really feel like it fits, sound like a wrong note, even though it's in key. So the pentatonic scale just took those away. It's almost like the dummy scale. Like, here, you can't mess this up. We gave you no notes that can sound wrong at any given time. I will say, though, that if you're playing in a major key, you do want to bring, from a point of minor speaking, this 6th degree back. Now, that's probably the next thing that I should point out, is that each of the notes, when you get into music theory, gets assigned a number. This isn't that hard when you think about the fact that the key that you're in, that will be number 1. So if you're in the key of C, C is 1. Let's move it to A minor, because we're thinking in minor. We want to use no sharps and flats, and the easiest version of this pattern is going A1, B2, C3. See? So you got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then when you get to 8, you're at your octave. Now, you've probably heard of notes or chords like 9th chords or 11th chords, 13th chords, a flat 13, all of that stuff. That is because when you get into these more advanced chords, these stacked chords or these upper voicings, that you will start referring to the next octave notes as being stacked on top of what you're doing. That's more advanced stuff, and if I feel like making this a very long video after I'm done with these basics, which I'm close to being done with everything that'll make this all make sense and tie it all together, and how this is useful and practical. But that's where you do get those upper voicings from. It's also the reason why, if you've ever seen on a sheet of music or even tablature, a little 8VA with like a series of dots, that's telling you everything you're looking at here is an octave higher than you're seeing it written. And that's in reference to an octave is eight whole steps away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm back there. And so the next thing to think about is, okay, like, how is this all useful and practical? Now, for starters, if you know your major scale and minor scale, and you know your pentatonic scale and how these things all link together, then by knowing your key, you know you can comfortably solo and not get out of key. So let's say the major scale and minor scale are both new to you, but you're fantastic with the pentatonic scale because you've been playing for 15 years, and that's most of what you've been armed with, and it's worked well. That basically means that if you know we're in C major, so you're doing that, but you're like, well, I just want to use my pentatonic scale. I don't want to fumble. I don't want to just like mess around with the major scale. It's new to me. I'm not comfortable. I'm not, Indiana Jonesing my way across this thing. I'm just stepping like, don't hit a wrong note, don't hit a wrong note. So you can go, okay, I'm comfortable with my pentatonic scale. Well, I know if I'm in C major, that means I'm in A minor, which means I'm in A pentatonic. So you got... So you go, okay, all of my pentatonic stuff is available to me now. All of my stuff that I'm good and comfortable with, I can do. The big thing that, if you are one of these players, is going to be difficult is kind of remembering which tones are going to feel like a good resting tone, because as a force of habit, you're probably going to resolve on that a lot, because that's home when you're in an A pentatonic. But if you do that over that major, it's going to feel like either you're not done or you didn't mean to do that. Almost a wrong note, even though it's about as far from a wrong note as you can get, it still doesn't feel quite right. So you do need to kind of get used to resolving on the key you're in. That's not the only thing. For instance, any note that's in a C major chord will feel like a nice resolve for that key. That will 100% of the time. Basically never wrong to land on that, but once you get advanced, you'll be like, I don't want to be that guy. I want to show that I know that I can land somewhere else and have it feel like home. Well, the other best spots for you are going to be the other notes that are in the chord. So your E or your G. So C, E, or G, which makes up your major chord, those will all feel nice and like home. Now, here's the next thing that we're going to get into, which is how to build a major and minor chord. I'm sure you already, at the very least, know your open chord shapes. Probably a couple of your minors. Maybe this one. And maybe even know this B7, which is really common for people to know as an open chord. And if you've gone one step beyond that, you're not just strumming the folk chords and stuff like that, then you're armed with your bar chords. I am a little out of tune. I apologize for that. I should have tuned before this, right? So you've got your outside major bar chord, and outside refers to the fact that it starts on the E string, and then inside just means it starts on the A string. Those are some terms to know. So outside major chord, inside major chord, outside minor chord, inside minor chord. And then, of course, power chord, which so if you have your outside major, outside minor, inside major, inside minor, you have all of these basic open shapes available to you. We'll assume you have that much as a starting off point. But the way a chord is actually made, it really only requires 3 notes. Your root note and your fifth, which you'll recognize as a power chord. And that's present in every chord. That's the reason why power chords work anywhere. The only time you would ever have an issue with that is if you've landed on a diminished chord. Every once in a while, the power chord will still work in a position where it should have been a diminished chord, or a half diminished. But don't worry about that. To brush by it real fast, diminished for the most part just means you've taken your fifth and you've flatted it. You're not going to use that a lot. If you don't play classical music, you don't play jazz, odds are you could go your whole music career never needing that chord, never needing to know where it fits into anything. And if you do use it, it's still maximum going to be like, less than 5% of anything you ever do on a guitar is going to involve diminished anything. I mean, even if you do play jazz or say like death metal or something like that, where those tones are going to be used, it's still just like, don't worry about it. That's what I'm saying. Don't worry about it. And if you get to the point where you do need to worry about it, this video ain't for you anyway. This is beginner stuff. This is hopefully taking you from beginner to I can hang with anybody. Okay? That's what we're trying to do. Never not know what key you're in. Now, I told you the number system, and so you have your 1, your 3, and your 5. That means that in the scale, if I go 1, 2, 3, there's my 3, 4, 5. So 1, 3, 5. And that makes your major chord. Now, the difference between a major chord and a minor chord is how many half steps you are away from your root. The fifth will always be the same distance, 7 half steps away. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that distance will always be fixed. Major and minor, minor will be 3 half steps away. Major will be 4. So, also that shape, good for shredding. So, good to learn those shapes. Now, beyond that, you have like your C shape. And because we're on guitar, like I said, everything we do when it comes to scales and chords, we tend to think this string to this string. Not the bare minimum. Like a pianist will hit just the 3 notes that they need. People in a jazz band, they'll just hit all of the fun notes and leave it to somebody else to hit the root note, which is funny when you have like 5 jazz musicians, you're playing a G13, nobody's hitting the G because it's like, I'm not gonna hit the G. I'm a jazz musician. I don't hit the root note. Somebody else will do it, But anyway, so G13. So, on guitar, your shapes will be much bigger, like this, where you have your 1, your 3, your 5, and then you're back to your 1, your 3. Or in the case of like this G shape, 1, 3, 5, 1, 1, 3, octave. And it's everywhere. 1, 5, octave, 3, 5, octave. So all of your chords have 3 notes spread out over 3 octaves. So usually at any given time, there will be 1 note that you're hearing in 3 octaves in any of your chord shapes. Or say you do a G like this. So you got 1, 3, 5, 1, 5 octave. So that being said, that's how you do it. Now here's where it all collapses together. You know how to make a major chord, you know how to make a minor chord, you know your major scale, you know your minor scale, you know how the two are connected to each other. You know that a C major is an A minor, you know a G major is an E minor, and all around the fretboard. D is B minor, and so on and so forth. E major is C sharp minor. If you have that general idea in your head, and then you know how to connect your comfortable pentatonic into that. So that's everything. Now is the thing of how you know which chords will correlate with which note, because each note in this scale has a whole entire chord that'll go with it. Because if we're in the key of C major, then obviously the C chord in that key would be a C major chord. Now the way it goes is using your whole step, half step thing. You know, the 2 holes and a half, 3 holes and a half. It's really easy. So if you're in a major key, so you're going, you have major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major, you know. And I'm leaving the diminished out for a reason. A, like I said before, how very little you'll need it. And I don't want you getting hung up on that, because this is the key part. In every key signature, you have 2 1-4-5s. Now, a 1-4-5, if you're not familiar, a lot of blues players will say that, oh, this one's a 1-4-5, and they mean you're going to be... And they might be talking about a 12-bar blues. It just implies these, you're going to play the one of the first chord of the key signature, the 4th, and the 5th. Now, if you're in a major key, your 1-4-5 will all be major. So if you're in C major, then your 4 is going to be F. So C, D is 2, E is 3, then F is 4. So your F will be major, and then your G is your 5, and that will be major. So in every single key, you have your 1-4-5 that are major. And then in your relative minor, you guessed it, all 3 are minor. Minor, minor, minor. And on your guitar, the shape will always look the same. So it'll be whether it's major or minor. Now, if you're on your inside, it looks more like, here, I'll keep it all in key. So major, major, minor. So that's your inside and outside version of your 1-4-5 chord pattern. Major, 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 minor, 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 and then minor, minor, minor. So those are your shapes, and you see how they connect. So immediately, you know if you're in the key of C, that these are the chords you're going to use. So if they go to an A, you don't have to guess if it's A minor or A major. You know it's A minor, and so on and so forth. And that being said, because you know how a major scale is built, you can tell what key you're in. So if somebody, so for instance, I was playing a gig this last weekend, and we were playing a song that goes back and forth from B major to A major. It's like, that was the whole song. We were doing some Sublime, you guessed it. So we were doing this thing, and the guitarist went to take a solo, and he's a fantastic blues guitarist, and he looked at his guitar and went, well, I'm starting on B, must be in B, I'm going to play my pentatonic scale. Now, as you already know, this is a B major chord I'm hitting, and as we said, pentatonic is minor, so immediately he's hitting us with that 5 up. That's the 5 he's hitting with, but we got this going on. And it doesn't sound terrible because we're so used to hearing a guitarist do that, and there's times that it works, but it doesn't sound like, I could tell while we were playing it that he was like, I'm not getting what I'm looking for. Now here's the thing to this, is if I have a major chord here and a major chord here, and in my key, we're only going to have 3 major chords, and only 2 of them are going to be 1 step away from each other. Well, I know I'm going back and forth between my 5 and my 4. 5, 4. That means that my 1 must be E. We're never going to touch E. There's no E chord in this song. But that's the key we're in. Feel how, oh, it feels like we're done. I hit home. I'm no longer going back and forth between these 2. So the trick would have been to play in E major. Or if you're used to your pentatonic, your E major scale is your C sharp pentatonic. So he could have busted out all of his pentatonic skills over this by shifting up to C sharp. I did yell that at him from behind the drum set, and then instead he just shifted the whole song up to C sharp. I was like, oh, okay. My bad. I wasn't clear. But anyway, so yeah, if you are over this and you're comfortable in pentatonic, you got your pentatonic and you're in key and you're over this thing. So that's one of those things that makes it a really nice advantage knowing this information, because it also means that without any guidance whatsoever, you can figure out for yourself what key you're in. All you really need is 2 to 3 chords, and that'll be a good guiding point. There are a couple of spots where the same thing will happen, and it's hard to tell whether or not you're in one position of one key or another position of another key. So for instance, if I have this minor going to this major, it could be that I'm in the key of B minor, and I'm going from my 1 to my 7. Or it could be that I'm technically in the key of A and I'm going from my 2 to my 1, and these will have different vibes. For instance, if I go, well, now I know I'm in B minor, but if I go, now I know I'm in A major and I'm just starting on my 2. Now, another thing you see a lot, and this will mess with people, is your 2-5. Now, this is all day, every day in jazz. This is their home base. It's the 1-4-5 for them of music. So, and you'll see a lot of guitarists in this situation use their B minor pentatonic. Now, the good thing about this is because of the fact that all of the notes in that pentatonic work in the key that you're in, it doesn't quite feel like home because you're ignoring some notes that do work a little better, and you're adding one of the ones that only sort of works, and you're constantly acting like B is your home. Now, that's not a bad thing, because, you know, for instance, when I'm doing this thing, it does sound better if I land on B or A, because that's kind of home for where we're at, as opposed to constantly ending all my solos on E, even though we're in E, and theoretically ending on E in the key of E should always work. There are things that will feel like they work better. So for instance, even if you're in the key of E, if B is supposed to feel like home, then you solo in E, but you land on B. Now you're playing modes. That's how modes really work. That's how they're actually practical. The other thing being that if you know your arpeggios, that means that instead of just playing scales, you can play the arpeggio of whatever chord you're over. If you understand your jazz extensions, you can even use other ones. So for instance, if somebody is playing a D minor, I can actually play an F major over the top of it and get this D minor 7th vibe. So I'm not being like, oh, well, there's D minor chord playing, so if I do an arpeggio, it sure must be a D minor. There's other ways that laying one arpeggio over another actually brings out some juicy notes you didn't even know were there. For instance, I have a song where it goes from this to this, but when I'm playing this chord, I'm actually playing this arpeggio, and it has a nice feel to it. But it accents some of the notes that make this mode of the key I'm in feel the way it does it. So there's like this vibe, this atmosphere to that mode, and by playing those notes over that chord, I'm tapping into the juiciness of that mode using arpeggios, using an arpeggio that isn't supposed to be the arpeggio of the chord that I'm on. So, you know, none of this is rules, by the way. I'll show you how to figure out what key you're in, stay in that key, but outside of that, you do whatever you want. You hit all the wrong notes and make them sound right. It's possible. Do whatever you want with this information. Now, there's one last thing, since we now know all of our notes. We got A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We know what sharp and flat means. We know what whole step, half step means. We know our major scale, our minor scale, our pentatonic scale, how they all fit together, how they're all kind of the same thing. We know which chords correlate with which notes in our scale. So, you know, we can now apply a whole entire chord to a single note of the scale and see how that is going to determine which chords we select for being in our key. There's one last thing that I really think is worth noting, and that is that your fifth degree in your minor key, this has to be mentioned because it happens, I would almost argue, over 50% of the time, that if you are in your minor key and you go up to your 5, it is so much more likely that that 5 is going to be turned into what's called a dominant chord, because it dominates you into going home. And that's actually a 7th chord. However, you can still get that dominating effect by just doing your major, and it'll make you want to go back. And like I said, it's worth noting because it happens nearly 50% of the time or more in songwriting and stuff, that even though you're in A minor and therefore your E should also be minor if you're being diatonic, if you're playing just the notes in your scale, it's just more often than not actually going to be a major chord, if not a 7th chord. So, at this point, I feel like if you've wrapped your mind around everything I've said and seen how it all connects and works together, you now have all of the functioning pieces of music theory to, like I said, you know, always stay in key, figure out what key you're in without any cues. If somebody gives you 3 or 4 power chords, you should be able to figure out what key you're in. Yeah, so that's that. I hope this was useful. Let me know.